Hello, my name is Aaron Cavanagh and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Post-Burnout.com. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. This is our website's podcast where we publish full-length recordings of our interviews, which are sometimes the unedited versions of our site's articles and at other times are exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back, and if this is your first time listening, thank you for checking us out. We hope you enjoy and consider subscribing, giving the episodes a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or giving it a rating if you're anywhere else. It really helps us out. Thank you. In this edition of Post-Burnout.com interviews, we talk with the legendary musician and producer Martin Bisi. Known for his Brooklyn-based studio, Bisi Studio, over the past 40 plus years, Martin has worked on material for the likes of Sonic Youth, Brian Eno, Herbie Hancock, the Dresden Dolls, Ramones, White Zombie, EMF, Iggy Pop, and many, many more. In this interview, we discuss his career, his latest krautrock-inspired EP, Your Ultimate Urban Fantasy, the urban and prosaic concept behind the EP, public transport and its influence on the sound of the EP, the gentrification in Brooklyn since his time living there, his time in material and working with Brian Eno in the late 70s and early 80s, how BC Studio has survived for all of these years, his production techniques, what he's listening to now, and much, much more. Hey Martin, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Wow, perfect. I can hear
Am
you
I
fine,
like,
yeah.
am I, well, hang on, let me see if I can, oh, there you go.
That's
That's better for
perfect.
me. Okay.
How are you? It's really nice to meet you, man.
Oh, I'm good. And thanks for having me.
No,
By the way,
absolutely, yeah.
are you using I just assumed we were talking, but are you using the video as well or
No, I
no?
won't use the video. Just if I am using this as a podcast, I'll just use the audio.
Okay. Yeah. Just curious.
Perfect. Yep,
Cool.
no worries. Yeah, the first thing I was going to ask actually, there's a lot to obviously go on. I think I'd use your new album, or sorry, your new EP rather, The Ultimate Urban Fantasy as kind of, as actually a good jumping off point to kind of, I guess, kind of reflect on your, I guess, almost 50-year career now at this point. I mean, this obviously seems like a very reflective piece and kind of examining sort of New York now as kind of the transition of New York as it is now from I guess when how you would have remembered it growing up. I was wondering what was kind of impetus for this EP?
Um, I think that, I mean, with all my records, I really hone in what the concept is really when it's almost done.
Yeah.
That tends to be what happens. And I've also noticed that I tend to also almost done. So when I'm still like a song short, then I kind of realize, okay, this is what it's about in a way, and what's in common with all the material, and then I add one more song with that, armed with that concept, and then just put it through. Actually, that song in this case is Transit Hub Extraordinaire,
Yeah.
because I understood what was happening in this. It was that strangely enough, every song was about a place. And I also realized that on the song, which is the improvised piece at the end, that was recorded at a venue in Williamsburg, which I'm not sure you are aware, but that's the poster
Yeah.
child of gentrification and displacement of arts and displacement of music. And so I was psyched to play in a venue that's just a holdout
Yeah.
in Williamsburg. So then I just tied that in. I said, well, that kind of can be part of it, and then it's also very different musically. But then, so that's why that's master plan for retaking Williamsburg. But yeah, I think the first song is the opening track, which is about riding the train in Manhattan, and then that one looks backwards, right? So there's references to the Guardian Angels, which were this group that I mean, you
The
could say
vigilante group, yeah.
they were kind of vigilantes, but they were like, I mean, now they're a
Peacekeepers.
little more toxic. Actually, now they're a little more toxic
Oh,
because
I didn't know they were still
the
around.
what's that?
I didn't know they were
Uh,
still around.
yeah, you see them around occasionally, but they're not like they were back then. But um the leader, Curtis Sliwa, he ran for mayor. He was the Republican candidate for mayor, and he also started taking this heavy law and order Republican position, which I didn't like. But what's interesting is that that wasn't clear when he had the Angels. So, but anyway, I do. That's one of my memories of like taking the 6 train on the east side of Manhattan, and then they'd be like getting ready for their night out on patrol, doing like kung fu and stuff, so everyone could see them on the platforms, like warming up. So anyway, I reference that. It's definitely a more feral New York. Some people would say it's so much better now, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of ties in a little bit with the ironies of like your ultimate urban fantasy. And actually in that song, Manhattan Local Train. I mean, even back then, I thought that was such an important part of New York City was in the subway. People really rubbed elbows, rubbed shoulders. These are your fellows, and it seemed to, equalize class at least for one ride.
Yeah.
At least for the 15-minute ride downtown, you would be sharing and seats and with people from the South Bronx, which is the poorest part of New York City at that time, right through the richest part of New York City. New York City has never been very car friendly. I mean, it's like you would take the train. So everyone took the train. Even our mayor, a little after this time, Mayor Bloomberg, the billionaire,
Yep.
he would, and make it a big deal. Like he would take that train. He would take the subway from his mansion on the Upper East Side, take that same train I'm talking about. And, he'd there and answer questions. So he'd be there on the train, accessible. And then occasionally the press would sort of follow him onto the train. And so they would be like a morning press conference on the train. So anyway, I always thought that was a great feature of New York City, and a staple of it, maybe unique. And so I touched on that with that song. And then then also, when I was talking about New York, then I felt like talking about Berlin, because Berlin is interesting in that it's actually creating a bit of a brain drain. It's like we're losing talent here in New York City for places all around, and one of the places is Berlin.
Yeah.
And I don't begrudge that. I'm just stating the obvious. And then so that's a playful take on like a cool. Can you still see me?
Yeah, see you fine.
Oh, it kind of disappeared for a second. Yeah.
Just for a second.
Yeah. It was a kind of a fun take on that, because it also is something that doesn't happen in quite so much in New York, which is anytime I'm in Berlin, I'm shocked by like how much time people have.
Yeah.
Much compared to New York. Like I'm just a little shocked, like because I have my revolving band is in Berlin, right? So I have a bit of a Berlin chapter when I do shows. I just did some touring in November with that group of people, and most of them are based in Berlin. So I go, I'm there rehearsing. So I'm in Berlin for a second, and I realized, wow, it's so much easier for people to say yes.
Yeah.
It's like, should we rehearse Tuesday afternoon? Fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got distracted by
No
someone. But yeah, so I noticed how much time people had, which was, to me, really, I even started wondering, do people even work? What's going on here? Like everyone's got time, and you can go out. And so there's a lot of time to spend on creativity that used to be in New York that way, where I could spend a lot of time, even developing the studio where I am here. And when I first was starting the studio, just to pay my nut of the rent, I just had to do like 2 odd jobs a month, and that was the rent. Because I had a friend with an art gallery. I could just go and stand there with a ladder. We're talking in the early 80s or whatever, and then he'd throw me $100. I do that 2 or 3 times, and that's my end of the rent.
Yeah.
So it's very so that's why I wanted to do something about Berlin, and that's why it's a playful thing of like someone really having the day off and like being picky about which hip neighborhood he's going to hang out in. So so they're just, and also just being trying to be funny a little bit with that. And then the other song, which is the sort of really hits the nail on the head, which is the title track, because it's just, people aren't, when I talk to people, it's amazing how little they know about the local politics. and it's politics, like with a capital P, which is really
Mhm.
tiresome stuff because it's all this navigating of who does what, or for whose palm is being greased, or why, or not stepping on this politico, not stepping on the shoulders of that, and mincing their words. I mean, it's just this. We got enough of that on the national level, but then when you look on the city level, it's funny. People don't know who their representative is and all this stuff. And this is the area that most directly impacts people. And I think it's also, having been in Berlin and also going on tour and going to these other cities, and some of these, like I was in Ghent,
Yeah.
Belgium, and which is where one of my bandmates, Joan Hacker, who plays on the record, actually, she lives in Ghent now, so she was part of our touring party. She in Ghent, they're talking about the same things, neoliberalism, and how that affects, and how it's like on the driver's seat is development and growth, right? That's in the driver's seat. And second to that is trying to resolve some like social issues. But we, the people, were sort of at the behest of like the people running the show. We can see who's running the show. You look at New York City, it's like that's the freaking show. Like this studio, and I'm increasingly uh, uh, valuing brick and mortar. A brick and mortar, whether it's record stores,
Yeah.
recording studios. I think of this studio as a bit of a community center. That's why I've even like some political jargon up on the walls and stuff like that, because it's a little like that kind of space, a little
Yeah.
bit, and like community space for musicians, and they come in here and record, and try to keep it affordable. So increasingly, brick and mortar, um, I think, has an emotional tie to people. Like I've noticed when, like say a venue in New York City, one that like if there was a venue in New York City that, for instance, was volunteer run, right? It's the
Yeah.
kind of thing where the people attend shows, or they can see the work of what it takes, and how people have taken care of the space and build it. They can see that it's very straight, and then they develop an emotional tie to that place. And you can see when the venue closes, people are in freaking tears.
Yeah.
You can't get this stuff in the internet. No one cares, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
guess some people are in tears that TikTok might be dissolved or something. I guess, but it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah.
you know.
No, totally. And actually, I don't know if it's big in New York, but over here, like what I'm noticing actually is a lot more corporate sponsorship of venues. I'm from Dublin, and over here we have like I'm seeing that a lot, like different corporations sponsoring venues. Is that kind of big in New York, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's big. And then also, it's not just venues. I mean, that's a big problem I have with the so-called solutions that the city
Yeah.
has, because all the solutions are sort of institutional, and the problem with that is also gatekeepers, right? So it's not DIY. It's really literally the opposite of it. So when you're dissolving DIY and it's replaced, and the city can say, "Look, we're supporting artists," but
Yeah.
then but then there's like a gatekeeper, and then the pickings are slim. So it's like, oh, we're subsidizing artist studios, but it's nowhere near enough. Proof that it's nowhere near enough is that they need gatekeepers. It's just a lot more demand than the supply of like commercial space where you can have like art studios or recording studios. So it's really a mess in that way. They talk about supply of housing, but
Mhm.
then the supply of this other stuff that we need is rapidly dwindling, and it's being replaced by this corporate. I mean, some of the stuff with the developers and stuff, where they're like subsidizing little art spaces here and there. I don't know if that's qualifies as corporate, but yeah, basically corporate.
Yeah.
Some of those are big. I mean, they're big entities. It's a lot of money involved, for sure.
Yeah, and actually, I think like everything you're saying is kind of intertwined. I mean, you were talking about the brain drain, going to Berlin, and it's like I think when gentrification happens, rental prices just go through the roof, and people just can't afford to live in a lot of these places. I mean, obviously, with BC Studio, I mean, you guys have been like survived so many different kind of eras of politics and of kind of social change. And obviously, I mean, like when you guys would have started, I guess it would have been like the beginning of like Reaganomics and things like that.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
find like I don't know, the politics at any given time is kind of either hindered or benefited what you're doing?
Well, I think there's a lot of ironies. Like I moved into the studio started was able to start here because it was an economically disadvantaged time, right? So there was what they called urban blight, and it's also just proof of a system that's really broken. You know that for music to be able to flourish, it needs a place where the system is really failing. So,
Yeah.
it's almost like where the system is really, really failing and on its knees, then actually maybe there's room for music, right?
That's a silver lining.
Yeah, and it's not, but then I kind of realize that. So I'm in this weird irony where the New York I'm hoping for is not it's not what um the New York that it seems like the mainstream perception of what people would want in a city. But it's funny with the within the people that have to rely on creativity, there is a sense of that is that their lifestyle is only as or their quality of life, which is something a city like the New York City, and that started with Giuliani and stuff,
Mhm.
mayor of New York City. He was the one that started talking about quality of life, and then it
Yeah.
just picked up. That was code for gentrification, and it was kind of racist too, by the way.
Yeah.
And um, people that create their quality of life is to have time and space to create, right? So it's their quality of life might be just as much of a park as much to have like a space with the right lighting. There's quality of life. So these are people that generally see capital moving in, and there goes the neighborhood. So they're
Yeah.
definitely they're much more open to that. Where there is a bit of a divide is that a lot of artists do seem to be a bit fatalistic. So they've um, accepted the sort of like trade-offs a bit, because obviously a lot of these, but even if you speak to them, they know it's a raw deal, right? So
Yep.
these because I'm friends with people that actually try to take advantage of this stuff and make and do applications and all this. Also, to be perfectly clear, is the reason I'm able to survive in this building is because I got in before the building became kind of what I'm talking about. Like
Right.
as far as art washing, the building I'm in now, which is a complex, an old industrial complex of building, it's part of the art washing that's happening, and they've gotten sweetheart deals from the city. So yeah, I should be also careful to note that I'm lucky, and so I diss this system that's happening, but I've also sort of benefited, although not necessarily directly.
Mhm.
I just um, and I'm lucky because the building I think that they were kind of into pushing me around at some point, but then the more work that came out, the more work, the more talk, the more I would even talk about what we're talking now, and that would like, um, and that would get out there a little bit. I think that they started taking seriously um, this studio, right? Because I really do have a lot of space. I have like two very large tracking rooms for drums and guitar, and they're sort of popular, I mean, for people that are into like recording studios and sound and stuff, it's a special thing that you can't get out of a plug-in, and it has value. So I think that because they're not the people that run the building are not musicians, and so they have to be sort of educated on that. Because I think when things started exploding with gentrification, they did consider moving me out because they figure, oh,
Mhm.
why do I need so much space? Again, it's like musicians have to take take like the crappy end of the stick, which was like, oh well, how can we squeeze the musicians some more? Maybe you don't need as much
Yeah.
space. Maybe you don't need as much light. Like you really need this, maybe throw some sheetrock. Who cares about acoustics? You know what I mean? But then, so again, and that's what I kick back to. It's like literally we're in a moment now. You really see it on the internet with Silicon Valley and all this stuff. Is music was just kind of musicians are just getting pushed around, demonetized.
Yeah.
Like this whole thing of like taking the value out of and then using like cynical, like abusing concepts of like sharing and mutual aid, and then abusing that to exploit people. It's like just really a horror. And even in my building, and even around here, it's so funny how when they do try to pay attention to the arts, they're not really including music. They're really, it's like visual arts, you know, and because I think that they're like easier to deal with or something.
Yeah.
And I've been open now. I've
Less
been
noise
open now.
pollution.
Like let's put it out there. Music is a pain in the ass. We all want music. It's going to be a pain in the ass. Like to pretend that's not the pain in the ass is not going to serve us.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, I have so much like to kind of go on from that. I guess I guess I'll leave it up to you. Would you like to talk about the studio, or would you like to talk about the album first?
Well, the other thing I'd mention, I don't know if you got it, but I just premiered. I just made public a video, music video
Okay.
for. Did Dan send
I
you
didn't
that for
see it. No,
Transit
I
Hub?
didn't see it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
I think I have your email. I'll send it to you. Just a music video on the fourth track on there, which is Transit Hub Extraordinaire. And it's funny
Yeah.
because that's they're talking about conceptualizing the album. When we were on tour, I kept saying, okay, so this album's about places, sort of urban or urban related places, fictitious, future, past, whatever, but that's sort of the nugget. So we're going to be touring. Let's think of, is there a place? Do we see a place that we could write a song about? Because I needed one more song, but now the concept of the album had congealed, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and then we spent so much time in these like transit hubs, airports, train stations, and wow. And I was like, wow. So then we kind of put together something in Berlin, just drums and voice based mostly, and just a few touches of guitar. And the
Mhm.
whole idea of drums and voices I really wanted to capture, and mainly drums, is to capture the sort of rhythmic and mechanical and
Yeah.
architectural quality
Yeah, I
of
noticed
these
on
kinds of
sorry.
places.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
noticed on
go on.
that
That's all I
track,
have to say.
kind of like bass because I when I read the EPK, one of the reference points was krautrock, and in that song in particular, obviously you had the kind of vocoded Rush Hour. It really did remind me of like Kraftwerk or like Audubon or Robots or one of those songs. I don't know if was that like a direct influence because I mean obviously like there's the German connection as you mentioned, but there's also the kind of focus on on transport, and there's a focus on kind of the electronic side of things. So I don't know if that was a direct influence for that song in particular, or is that just like a happy coincidence?
Oh, a little bit. It was no, definitely not a coincidence. I was quite
Yeah.
aware of that. Also, I was a little sensitive. I was a little sensitive to this sort of prosaic concept here. Like we're going to do a song about train stations. Something about that is very different than my previous material, which is supposed to be very like cathartic and have an emotional quality and immersive. And no, we're just doing something about like just being around a lot, basically these train stations, being at the airport, right? And
Yeah.
so it seemed so mundane. That was the word I meant. Really, it's like a very mundane concept. That then I felt sensitive to that, and that's why I felt that. So my backup was, and I love Trans Europe Express, the Kraftwerk song. So if they can write a song about like, well, first of all, it's trains, right? And
Yeah.
I certainly can write I mean, or Autobahn, right? They did a song about highways. So why
Yeah.
can't I do a song and be taken seriously about train stations? So yes, so that being on my mind, now I really feel like I just stole the concept of the vocoder in there. But yeah, I guess so. I guess you just play with these influences, and maybe I did want people like if you listen to this, why drums, and it's definitely like krautrock meets like Caribbean music,
Yeah.
basically the drumming, right? But maybe I did want people to hear those sounds through that lens a little bit.
Mhm.
So if it actually reminded people of Autobahn or Trans Europe Express, that maybe actually helped shade what I'm trying to say with the music, and then you might be more likely to go, oh, I get it. This is sort of it's about mechanized conformity, this kind of stuff.
Well, I think of actually it's interesting kind of image of train stations because you think about like as you said for like most people it's just kind of mundane kind of day to day means of transportation. But when you think of like trains and like say cinema, I mean it's always like used in films like someone arriving or someone leaving, and it's always like it can be romantic or it can be dramatic or it can be kind of tense or kind of mysterious even. Even think of like at the subway system, and it's like you think of things like the French Connection or something like that. There's always like it is kind of a fixture of the imagination in a lot of ways, and even though it does seem like a mundane thing. And from an auditory perspective, I mean, when you think of like a subway station, or you think of a train station, there are very distinctive kind of sounds that come to your mind. I don't know, did that also kind of influence you when you kind of went, okay, I have a sense of like place, and kind of want to talk about have these ideas for locations for my music? Did that kind of I don't know, kind of spark any ideas then of what the sound was going to be?
Well, the thing that really and it's funny because when you see the video, you'll notice it's in part of it is in Grand Central Station. Sorry, hold on. Part of it is in Grand Central Station,
Hmm.
and that's the same station. You might even recognize some of the location of. I think it's Shadow of a Doubt,
Hmm.
which was that a Hitchcock
I think so, yeah.
thing, and yeah, and there's some classic noir type
Yeah.
film where there was like some intrigue on a train and someone's trying to escape, or there's some that I think, and so there's a scene in Grand Central Station, and then there's also a scene, I think it's like North by Northwest or something, where Cary Grant is trying to escape and stuff. So he's there with the like trying to hide, and that's in Grand Central Station. And even some of the like, there's a point in the video where I'm like, I grab onto the gate because I don't have any money to ride because it's actually kind of expensive. Some of the train rides,
Mhm.
and so that I grab that's actually in the film. So it didn't even occur to me to think about that, but you can set some of the scenes of that video, of my video, to you can match them. Um, Actually, the thing that really sparked me is like, okay, this is it. Is we happen to be in the Cologne train station on the first day of like the Rhineland Carnival or something, which is
Okay.
this all out regional freak out, right? That where people like dressed in costumes and people drink starting in the morning and no rules, and that train station was a mob scene, and then people chanting and walk around chanting, and like none of that could I understand. And then I was like, what a fucking scene. I mean, what a
Yeah.
thing. So that's what really prompted me. Maybe this is the place, because it added dimension. It's not just people in a rush, it's also these people coming together to like, and that's why in the song there's a thing where I'm calling out St. Patrick's Day and New Year's
Yeah.
Eve and Halloween, and I throw in Hanukkah for good measure, so it's like, um so it's like it's also like a meeting place in that way. And what was interesting about that is that in those occasions, it's our society, it's almost like the Hunger Games or something. It's like on those occasions society allows for complete mayhem, so they allow you to like blow your fuse in a
Hmm.
sort of controlled, designated day
Yeah.
holiday, where here everyone can completely flip out, and and then that's acceptable, but you can't do that on any other day. And the other day it's like a marching in unison and time, the a lot of order, that this is when the train leaves, this is when it comes back, and then on that day it's like everything's. So I kind of
Yeah.
saw it also in that line. But now that you talk about it, I realized that like in that space, Grand Central, where you'll see in the video, is that when people really spend money on these transportation hubs, you notice how the ceilings are always super high. It's almost
Yeah.
like a cathedral. It's
Yeah.
almost like the mindset of the designers is almost probably what the mindset of the designers of cathedrals in the Middle Ages. He said, "Well, we need tall ceilings because we need people to think that there's something bigger than themselves that they're a part of, and that they're like sheltered in this bigger picture that's like a wide umbrella that includes everyone together, right? It's probably the same
It's an
talk of
oratory of
someone saying,
transport.
how are we going to like get, but anyway, so that was, yeah, that was but so the sonic influence on that was really just the absolute mayhem. And then I started thinking about what we could do with that. And then I started, well, there's so many dimensions here. There's escalators, there's this, there's that, then I started really pouring through all the dimensions. And for the first time in my life, really thinking about transit hubs.
Yeah.
But you got to
I,
get used to them. You're going to be spending a lot of time in these things. That's just the way it has been, is going to continue being.
Yeah. Actually, I want to ask, kind of, we were talking there about the kind of krautrock influence. I was wondering what your kind of listening habits are nowadays, because I mean, obviously you're still working as a producer and as an engineer, still producing music, still mixing music. I was wondering, yeah, kind of, do you try to keep up with contemporary music, or are you kind of content to listen to kind of what you're familiar with, or what's your kind of listening habits now?
Well, for listening, I really rely on people. Like sometimes when I did a big we did a big car trip with some friends, and then someone's a DJ, so
Yeah.
they DJ'd our car ride, and they
Okay.
played some fantastic stuff that I wasn't aware of. So there's that. I kind of, because I just don't have time really. So like right now, if I were to be like, oh, I've got some listening time, probably should pay attention to. I have like a little bit of a backlog of stuff I need to listen to, local bands, local artists that are happening now. So I've always felt that position that I'm not that. I do listen to some newer stuff just out of duty, so I know
Hmm.
what people are doing, so I can do a good job as a recording engineer and catch trends. Also, I really put a lot of emphasis on live performances. So, like when people say, "Oh, what records influenced you when you were a kid?" You'd almost have to go to really when I was a kid, because when I started getting really influenced, and it was a luxury to be in a place like New York City, really, for this. When I started getting influenced by music of what's out there, it's from live performance. Is that so? So bands that influenced me, I might not have ever heard their records. I just went, I like, I don't know, some of the local bands at CBGB's. Like it was, yeah, I went to the shows, and then I don't know. Sometimes I maybe never heard the record. I don't know.
Yeah.
So a lot of listening habits now, when I feel like I am immersing myself, is it's filtered through how people, um, like what people are doing. So my sense of what's going on is very based on trying to go to like small local shows, and I see what people. So I get a sense, of like maybe what's kind of retro, but what's maybe a little more forward looking. The reality is, I think that a lot is very retro right now, and even a lot of people doing electronica. I'm actually surprised how retro it is,
Yeah.
because a lot of people are using sounds and beats and stuff that kind of that remind me a lot of like 70s club
Hmm.
music.
Yeah, I know
So,
so
and
too.
and
It's
the fact that
there's
you're
also kind of
seeing,
disco revival.
yeah, and you're seeing a lot of these musicians also coveting, vintage synthesizers and vintage, so it's vintage, right? So it's now it's actually moved into the same dynamic as like rock music,
Yeah.
where like guitar players are coveting like a 1972 guitar. Well, now we have the synthesizer version of that, right?
Yeah.
So it's all pretty retro. And sometimes people don't realize how retro it is,
Yeah.
but that's because they continue innovating. So people, if you're an outsider, you might go, "Wow, that sounds a hell of a lot like 80, like 70s, 80s club music," but they're like in the weeds, which is valid, and they're like tweaking, so it's not exactly the same. And so maybe that's kind of how a lot of change happens.
Well, you.
Also, generally, I have a general feeling that I only come all my life I come upon appreciating some, not all, of course, but a little bit of major commercial music way after the fact, like a decade later, maybe 15 years later. The thing that just had no interest for me at all, I kind of somehow I'm exposed to it again, and I go, well, actually maybe it was kind of good, because all the
Yeah.
baggage gets taken out, that it's corporate, or
Yeah.
that all these kinds of things, or the money that stains it in my brain. And then you pull, or especially now with rap, I might come around to listening to some of this billionaire rap, some of these rappers that are billionaires, but that right off the bat turns me off. Like, I'm not going to listen to Kanye. Sorry, I'm not going to listen to like ruling class rappers.
Yeah.
So, but then what will happen is in 15 years from now, it'll probably be like, oh, actually, this and that was not bad. So,
Well, you were kind of like around for like a lot of the early scenes. I mean, like kind of would have been in like New York at the beginning of the punk scene. You know, obviously the no wave scene and the hip hop scene. You were involved in the early days of those. I was wondering, what do you think was like the last kind of like that you recognize the last kind of big new innovation in music? Because, like you said, I do think a lot of things now are kind of harping to the days of yore. It seems like a lot of people are kind of like looking back and trying to uh, kind of reinvent the wheel. It seems almost. It seems like they're I don't know, trying to do something new with what was already there. I was wondering from your perspective. I mean, what do you think is kind of I don't know, sort of innovative for you?
Yeah. Also, yeah, I'll answer that. Just quick comment is that a lot of music that then became commercial that I worked on in the 70s, or I mean not 70s really, like 80, early 80s. Um, that was not music that was mainstream at the time. So even if we think of like big hip hop and rap, that was not perceived as national. That was not a national market. It was kind of urban. I used to call it like capitals, like so places like capitals,
Hmm.
Paris, Buenos Aires, London, or whatever capitals. Maybe there'd be like people aware of hip hop or something like that, but definitely not in Middle America, right?
Right.
So it wasn't big mainstream. And actually, one song that which I worked on is Rocket really helped
Herbie Hancock.
bust.
Yep.
So that was very exciting to me in a way, something that was at that point I could still with a straight face say it was underground.
Yeah.
Arguably still kind of underground. At that point, it was the cat was out of the bag, and I thought that was significant too because I thought these, especially with rap, these were voices that needed to be heard. And then with punk, and like when then 1993 was the year that punk broke, as they say, and those were also concepts like political concepts. So there was a strong feminist presence in that music, even a band like Sonic Youth with Kim Gordon in it, a feminist not just women in a band for the pleasure of like the male gaze or something like that. It's like as they're on in their own right as musicians and conceptualists and artists. So that was a big. So I was very excited about a certain mainstreaming of some of the vibes and scenes that I was involved in. Now, in retrospect, I maybe regret a little bit of that. Like maybe
Sure.
something should just remain underground, and because then there's a point where you're like, who are these people that like this music that I used to think, and not to be an elitist or anything,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, a bit of tribalism on this, where it's like, well, this is like our stuff, and then you kind of throw it out there, throw it away a little bit. But anyway, the last major, I've always felt that these revolutions in sound and what appear to be revolutions in genre rely on technical innovations. They rely on instruments, right? So when you had um, rock and roll came from was like electrified version of like rock and hillbilly music as they used to call it, right? Which is
Yeah.
like acoustic guitar, and so then you plug it into an amplifier, and then there are some musical innovations, right, that happen, kind of minor almost musical innovations, right? Tempo might be a little different, dynamics are a little different, but it's the same nuts and it's the same toolkit, but yet
Yeah.
you change the palette, right, or you change basically the instruments, and then it's a revolution in sound. Same with electronics, same with like being able to program rhythms and stuff. So I think that if unless you're a tool maker, you're a little stuck with revolutionizing like genres and new movements because there's only so much you can do with like a cool song or two. So yeah, there's innovation, but in terms of like upheavals and like completely new sounds, big generational changes, I think you're stuck with and it's hard to imagine, so I can't tell you when I think the next um change of that nature will happen. I think what was kind of funny is back to this of like, can musicians be tool makers, and do they rely on the tool makers? Which I would say yes. Look at shoegaze,
Hmm.
right? So it's like at that point, it's like, well, we can't come up with new instruments, but maybe we can line up more pedals in a row. And I'm down with that. So if to answer your question, it might be that shoegaze was the last uh, true sonic revolution. A lot of what I'm hearing now, like for instance with live music, some of the changes that seem to be happening is less, but it was already happening, but it's accelerated with during the pandemic, which was less like bands,
Mhm.
right? Less bands, and then more reliance on like pre-recorded material, or which I try to minimize on stage. You know, just a pinch of
Yeah, yeah.
sounds I bring in, but try to make it all like performed on the spot. But there's been a shift also because people have the ability to. People have home studios now, so you work at home with your home studio, and you have stuff you're excited about. You kind of want to present it live, right? So you want to get up on stage and just do a bit of a performance, but hey, this is what I worked on, you know, and so
Yeah.
then play it. But I'm not sure if that's a change in genre because, like I said, is it's a bit like reinventing the wheel, as you said. So I'm surprised how much of it actually reminds me of like I don't know, like an electronica group, a group that relied on programmed drums like Suicide,
Mhm.
right? Alan Vega. That I don't know. I hear stuff that reminds me of Suicide, you know. Um, but you know, it's funny because there's also a little bit of a, particularly in queer spaces, there seems to be this revival of like a sort of slightly poppy, what I've been calling like queer punk hardcore, but slightly,
Yeah.
I don't want to call it pop punk because it's not like Green Day or something, but
Mhm.
slightly more poppy and a bit more positive,
Yeah.
right? So it's been a little blindsiding for me. So I go to these things and a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not Pride Day. We're no longer in Pride Week or Pride Month, but it seems to be those kinds of events because I have friends that play at them and stuff. And um, I am noticing that the tone has to be sort of celebratory, right? So it's a lot of
Yeah.
energy. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
ba ba ba, we're doing this and that, you know. And then they're kind of throwing in some Free Palestine in there too while they're at it, and kind
Yeah.
of, you know, they're but it's sort of, and then I've been to ones where it's like all women and trans, right, or
Yeah.
whatever, or all LGBTQ trans night, just all these bands, and they do take a bit of that sort of also queer culture of how they dress, right? So it's more it's a more glam, like expressively
Yeah.
expressing themselves through that way, and it's a good party, right? So it's celebratory, but I've noticed that very specifically that there is um uh a return, it seems right now, which is almost like post noise rock. So for a minute there, everything was sort of inscrutable and about alienation,
Mhm.
and now this zone is a bit. And I do like the return to hardcore, but it seems, and there'll be women playing it, right? So it'll be interesting. There might almost be a bit of a politic there where they're reclaiming something that had a cool, because you know hardcore was always supposed to be inclusive, right? But at
Mhm.
the end it wasn't so much.
Yeah.
So there's a maybe reclaiming of like a male space, you know. So there'll be like, you know, like a smoking female drummer. I saw one the other day, you
Yeah.
know. The drummer was just mind-blowing, but you know, I think that it was, you know, women playing these instruments. So I think that was a little bit part of what's inspiring about this sort of sub movement that I've started, but it is very retro.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think everything you're saying is like really true. And I think of like, kind of like when kind of queercore in like the late 80s and the 90s that were kind of like was around like and compared to like kind of uh I really think that was like, kind of a sort of a progenitor to what we're seeing now. And I think it is really cool. Like I think a lot of the genres from yesteryear are kind of expanding to maybe what they should have been back then, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should mention the name of the band was adult adult human females. That was the name of
Okay.
the band I saw, and I think they were kind of a new band, but they had that. They were like kind of hardcore queer. It's like queer hardcore, slightly
Yeah.
poppy. That's the best I can say. And then Come Girl 8
Okay.
was the headliner that night, and that also has a little bit of that vibe. They're a little less hardcore, but I was noticing. But it's been coming. I've been noticing these shows like that. So I don't know. First of all, honestly, I'm glad to see people fucking playing. You know, like
Hmm.
so I'm seeing that, and I'm very happy to see young people. And I've been saying for a while the whole thing of like that. Sometimes the live music is going to stick around because some people want to excel and dedicate themselves. So here you have, like in this case, I think I saw somewhere that Gibson guitars, its market is majority women now.
Oh, cool.
or for the first time equal or something like that, but
Yeah.
a big increase. So that was the domain of. So that's why maybe some women aren't attracted to some of these, a bit of patriarchal bands as they see it, but then they see the music and go, well, that's pretty good. We should just do. We can be inspired by the music and do it ourselves and do it better, for that matter,
Yeah.
and innovate. So that's nice.
I think the best thing actually about kind of like the diversity in people kind of making music is I think it's actually a way to get kind of educated in other people's lives that you like, different life experience in a fun way. You know what I mean? Like you can just go and listen to a band kind of like singing about kind of like their lives, and you're like, well, I don't have that kind of experience, but I get what they're saying. Like, and it's just a good way to educate yourself too, I think, so you can have a good night and open your mind a bit.
Well, yeah, well, that's the thing with when you have a diverse group of friends, it's kind of important, because I mean, there's stuff I don't notice, um, and then someone's got to tell me, So
Yeah.
I've had to literally have people tell me this is my experience. And half the time when we go there, I'm like, oh my God, I have this
Yeah.
look of horror on my face,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like I really, thanks for telling me. I just wouldn't know because a lot of the difficulties people are experiencing is sort of, it's not public necessarily. It has to do with like what happens at a job interview or what happens in these other relationships or moments on the street or something. So I can, when I see very public, when I'm in a very public situation, it might not be obvious to me what some of these struggles are. Like for instance, I had a black bandmate, and he had to point out to me how like, and what was interesting about this, and I don't want to put too much stock in how someone looks, but this black person in my band looked like this he actually looked like this very nice guy, like kind of well dressed, a little preppy,
Hmm.
and just looked approachable and friendly and nice, handsome, you know. And then there's someone else in the band that looked really mean and rah rah rah. And the black guy said to me, "It's incredible. No one after our sets would come to him and give him a high five or say, 'Hey, cool man, I really dig your thing,' or ask about his instrument. Nothing, zero, not once. But then the
Hmm.
guy that looks really mean, people go, 'Yeah, man, give him a high five,' blah blah blah." I guess maybe they relate to that. Maybe they just
Yeah.
relate to this like person that looks like he's going to kick your ass, right? And the other person that looks kind of slighter and nice. I mean, but that's what I'm saying. It's not about
Yeah.
what struck me was like the most approachable one of all of us was this black person, and no one wants to talk to him. So it
Yeah.
really shows. So he had to explain that to me. I, of course, was in shock
Yeah.
because I didn't know what was happening. I just assumed they're talking to all of us, but no.
There's a bunch. I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been very gracious. I just have a few more questions.
Yeah, yeah, please, because I feel like I've been just rolling, and so I haven't
No, 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 absolutely
let
not.
room
No,
for you.
I've enjoying it. I just don't want to take up your time, but I'll stay for 3 hours if you want. Yeah, no, I had a question about the kind of the because there's two things that are kind of going on parallel. I think since BC Studios started. So I mean, obviously, it was set up in Brooklyn, which at the time, as far as I'm aware, based on an interview I read with you, you were saying at the time, Manhattan was kind of the only borough in New York at the time that was really the kind of like happening place or the kind of place that was seen as kind of culturally significant, whereas Brooklyn didn't have that connotation. Obviously, since at least the 90s anyway, I mean, Brooklyn's kind of become the central hub of New York. And that's something that the studio has kind of grown with, and also the advancements in technology. I mean, in the early days it would have been cutting tape with a razor blade. Now there's obviously digital technology. I was wondering, like, how do you find what you've been doing and the studio has been kind of evolving with both the cultural and the technological shifts over the years?
Well, I'm very resistive of changing anything technologically. So and it's not from any kind of doctrine about
Mhm.
it. It's just a feeling that I'm doing good stuff. I'm not searching for a new process. Plus, I think process is really important. Like an artist is only going to be as strong as their process works for them and works
Mhm.
well. So, I'm not in a race to change things. And so it took me a while. Every time I made a change, and particularly technologically, there was a real reason. So it really took facing a new reality. Like, for instance, we're switching from tape and actually incorporating digital. I did a hybrid for a little while. Was I realized it was no longer acceptable to run out of tracks, for instance, because there was a time in yesteryear where you could just say, we've run out of
Yeah.
tracks. I guess we're done. That's the end. There's nothing else you can do. Or we'd have to make some hard choices and erase something or blah, blah, blah. And so that was like, okay, I got to start incorporating digital. And then tape started getting bad. And so there was slow shifts. And I do tend to get a little antsy, really. I've sort of found myself to be a bit of a, as I called it, a genre trader. I started realizing I do get kind of bored a little bit. So I'm a little enigmatic that way, where there's sort of a little push and pull. Like it's fun. It's funny. Like, there's two things. I get bored, but yet on the other hand, when we're talking about like what I feel is current, there is stuff that's current that might not be huge, that is part of an arc, right? So there's people that are part of, they're young people doing stuff, as we were just talking with hardcore, young people doing stuff that's part of the arc of, like, say, No Wave. There's definitely a bunch of that, or part of the arc of this or that. So sometimes I'm a part of those arcs. So it's not being nostalgic, really, is I'm a part of those arcs, and I like being part of that conversation, and I like seeing them develop. But yeah, but I do, on the other hand, get bored kind of easily. So there's a point, like maybe 4 or 5 years, that I just sort of jump ship and just sort of contradict myself, even just try different things. So then I'm a bit of a trader that way, where it's like, oh, I don't do that anymore or whatever. And then I come back. So I'm a little I'm maybe flaky in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But yet that's led me to some good places. So there would have been a time I wouldn't have touched anything gothy with a 10-foot pole. And then I'm like, you know what? I want to do gothy stuff. And then when I was doing gothy stuff for a while, I'm like, I don't know. And then I did more mod stuff, which is like the anathema to the goths, right? So I was doing mod stuff. And so, like in the like Strokes era, I didn't record the Strokes, but sort of I worked with bands that would like play open for the Strokes, so it was that there's suddenly a mod world. And I thought that was interesting. Like, I liked it. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question. And the experimental music is funny. It's funny. That's the weird bread and butter through the whole thing, is straight up experimental music. And that's like a mainstay. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about Brooklyn that I found is that kind of experimentation is at a premium. Like, that's really what Brooklyn in its self-image feels like, what it's about, as opposed to other places. Maybe like if you think of Nashville, it's more about musicianship and quality, and here it's a little less about actually musicianship and more about experimentalism within the context of more common forms is at a premium here. So that, for instance, I think that's why shoegaze really took off here. I think it was actually influenced by stuff in the UK pretty clearly. That's also part of an arc, but when it really became more like officially, that's what we're calling it. It's like shoegaze. I think that was actually lended a bit of an experimental quality to the music, because it's a little like this. You can tell there's like screwing around with sounds, backwards echoes, where there's hardly any room for backwards echoes, this kind of stuff. So it starts getting experimental. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I haven't changed that much.
Well,
I still like, I think that not purely, but generally there should be something subversive in the music that one makes. And I'm not that demanding about that concept, because it's hard. Like, it's like demanding for things to be original. Like, I don't need, first of all, it's impossible. So I just really am happy with even a pinch of originality. Even a pinch of originality is a lot, because you're not going to find something that's completely original. So just a little bit, you kind of got me, So as far as subversion, I feel like when you're kind of like bucking this world, I think that that's something that fires me up. Even the name of the studio, BC, of course, it sort of comes from my name, but BC, which sort of means supposed to mean before Christ, but I didn't really mean it as that. I meant it more like before Common Era.
Yeah.
And I remember the track sheets at the studio with BC were like made like the Flintstones cartoon. It was kind of bad, right? It was bad actually, but whatever. But I'm just saying that's where
Yeah.
my head was at. So it was like BC was like prehistory,
Yeah.
and then there would be like a dinosaur with a microphone. Really embarrassing. I had a friend of mine like design a microphone with that. That was the logo for a minute. Really horrifying. I mean, just bad. But that's where my brain was at, which was um, sort of bucking the modern world. Like, like we got to function in it. We use electricity or whatever. But so I guess it's subversive or revolutionary in a sense. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think so. I just have yeah, one or two final ones. One thing I want to ask. I mean, when we kind of look back at your career, I mean, like you look at like some of the people you worked with. I mean, obviously, Brian Eno, but as well as like Herbie Hancock, Sonic Youth, White Zombie, Dresden Dolls, Swan. So many like artists who would later like really explode and become massive. Well, obviously Herbie Hancock and Brian Eno were already big, but I was wondering like when you kind of like look back at that and kind of like do you kind of go like do you kind of feel like you saw something that these people are going to be like really big, or do you find does it kind of, I guess, is it rewarding to your own sensibilities to be like, yeah, I have good taste? If I was with them when they were I decided to work with them in early in their career, or does it feel vindicating, I guess, to see the bands that you worked with kind of explode later on?
Well, that's my and I don't need a lot of these um what's the word, but the great experience, like for me, is to work with a band or an artist that has maybe a little bit of a following, maybe a little something going on. They're kind of bubbling under a little bit, they're kind of popular locally or whatever, have a little something going on, and then do a record and then have them kind of blow up. So that's clearly what happened with Dresden Dolls. I think even with some extent with Sonic Youth, but definitely with Dresden Dolls. So that was a phenomenal experience. That's the best thing. So for instance, as a producer, unlike Bill Laswell, who's my collaborator, his dream. So that's my dream, right? Like if which is seldom, but if that can happen, basically it's going from grassroots to something that really is impacting like a ton of people. Um, that's my dream. That's the best dream, right? For Laswell, his dream was always to work and rehabilitate somewhat some of his heroes of the past. So he was more into the sort of um, tarnished or whatever, like legends, right? So you can take doing
Kind of like
doing a record with
revitalization.
yeah, like, well, Herbie Hancock, that was clear. Doing a
Yeah.
record with like Ginger Baker, even the PIL stuff with John Lydon or whatever. That's not the Sex Pistols. It was afterwards, but so he
Yeah.
was sort of. I think Lydon was sort of like, okay, now what, right? And so
Yeah.
Laswell like would step in and kind of so that PIL record kind of helped. So that's Laswell's dream, and it's funny because we were very much at odds with that. He thought it was very weird. Laswell thought, because he was like up the ladder and work with these like big names. In fact, that's what happened with Hancock. And I was like, fine, like I was glad to do the Hancock record, but the thing that really got me excited was like bands like Live Skull or whatever, that like working with the records and then seeing how that impact, because it's so much more of an interesting jump to
Yeah.
go from like complete obscurity to like something that's out in the open in the air. Like that's a dramatic jump and change in fortune, and that's inspiring versus like taking like a faded legend and just making something slightly better or kind of put them in a new context. I mean, that said, Rocket was kind of mind blowing. But I remember at the time when we were going to do this record with Herbie, I think, I mean, someone like Laswell actually probably thought it was a little weird because I wasn't that excited,
Yeah.
you know. And then with Eno, I thought it was, you know, exciting. That was my first recording session, so I hadn't even had any experience yet. But that's not where my brain was at. It's not. It's like, well, is Eno going to come and play at CBGB's? You
Yeah.
know, is he gonna play is he gonna play a squat?
Yeah.
The answer is no, right? So to me, it was kind of like, okay, it's nice, but it wasn't like my path.
Yeah.
That's the thing. My path is very grassroots. That's what gets me excited. But yeah, with Eno, now in retrospect, um, when I see his trajectory, I think that his time in New York City was something that's not very heralded or very much talked about, which is his time. Pretty much it started with the record No New York, which was 1977, which had some of the classic no wave bands on it. So that was like at the beginning of his time in New York, and his time in New York kind of ended shortly after the recording with me. So that period, we're talking about a golden era in New York. That's why these people came to New York, because it was an incubator, and he talks about that. It was like an incubator of ideas and
Yeah.
stuff, and a crossroads. But yeah, in retrospect, I think just seeing. So I'm proud of the Eno thing, also because it's very much not like me,
Yeah.
right? Like the Eno's thing is kind of not really. So to actually see that it maybe is kind of like me a little bit, like
Yeah.
that's kind of exciting to me, just to feel like have a little more dimension, because it's
Yeah.
not like it's punk, or it's not like it's, you know, it's like an ambient record. Not I'm doing more I'm what I'm doing now, which I occasionally do like more ambient droney kind of shows.
Uh-huh.
That's more like Eno in 1981 than I've been in between. So I've actually gone more in that direction.
Yeah. It's actually
Oh
really
shit!
interesting. It's actually really interesting, like when you
Can you
kind
still
of
see me?
I can't, but I can hear you okay. There we go.
Okay, okay,
I can
okay,
see now. Yeah, it's
good.
interesting when you kind of like look at like the different trajectories that you know the people of material kind of went and the people they worked with, and it does really seem like every kind of member really did, you know, kind of carve their own distinctive path and kind of like I think, but everyone ended up working with very interesting artists. You know, it's just like I don't know, it's such like a cool I don't know outcome. I think you know.
Yeah, well,
Um,
it's really true. But I'm checking the time just because I gotta.
no, no
Sorry.
worries. If you gotta go,
Have, no, no. Have we been on for an hour or more than an
yeah.
hour?
Just about an hour.
Okay, I'm good. I have a session at 3:30, 3:30 my time. So whatever.
Yeah.
I just need a little buffer. I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's actually pretty stunning. When I was in high school, my last year of high school, my roommate was 1 year older than me. That was Michael Beinhorn.
Hmm.
And so Michael Beinhorn ended up going on to, well, he became part of Material. And so he worked on Rocket. And so that was my high school roommate. And then he went on to um, produce stuff like Joan Jett and Soundgarden, Korn, even.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, and he's it's him. He's the one that met Laswell, and then like 2 weeks later said, "Oh, you got to meet my new friend." We're like teenagers. He goes, "Oh,
Hmm.
you got to meet this guy Bill, who just moved here from Detroit. He's really cool. Maybe we can like kind of do stuff with him." So then he brought me in to see Bill and to meet Bill. So we were this little coterie of kids, and then somehow I guess enabled by Bill, really, because he was older and he was on this path. He came to New York meaning business. This guy came to New York meaning to, same as Eno. It's like all these people drawn to New York at the time to like get busy and stuff. But our other friend, who was like 14 at the time, was Fred Maher, Maher, who then
Hmm.
ended up working with Lou Reed and I think produced some Lou Reed records, and he ended up in Material too. So we had this underage drummer in
Yeah.
Material for like a little while. So it's so funny that of us three, for instance, we all ended up in production in some way.
Yeah.
So I don't even know it's like weird coincidences or paths connect. I don't know.
I like I said, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you have to go. One final thing I wanted to ask. Obviously, what kind of drew you to the avant-garde was a rejection of kind of academically accepted music. I was wondering, now as the years have passed, have you ever tried to go back there? Have you ever tried to rediscover the classical music that you once rejected, or is it still something that has no interest to you?
It really has no interest to me, but I've realized that there's a weird irony which I question even myself. Like for instance, on the previous record, Feral Miss, I have friggin' opera on there.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this woman, Amanda White, who's just a I think she doesn't think she's so great. I don't know why, but I think she's a phenomenal soprano voice. Just can reach some high notes with like intensity and stuff, and that's crucial for me in some of my writing, where it's like I can't hit those notes, and then she hits them like strongly and with the vibrato or whatever. So it's like wow. So I have opera on a couple of records. There's also on Ex Nihilo. There's some opera singing, like the that song Mermaid Queen. That's some opera, and then also on Feral Myths, Amanda is doing some opera. And then another person that studied opera is this woman, Sarah Fantry, from the local band Weeping Icon, and she's also on a couple songs in Feral Myths, like on A Storm Called Ida.
Mhm.
So that's clearly an opera reference. Why? How? I mean, I feel it. I'm actually against opera in a way, but it's interesting to note that my great aunt. So my mom was a classical pianist, and then her aunt was Matilde de Lerma. She was an opera singer. I guess we're talking like the early 1900s or late 1800s.
Okay.
And she was an opera singer, sang with Caruso and stuff. So I have an opera singer in my like family tree.
Yeah.
So it's in there in the past, and then also my family took me. I went with my parents every other week to the opera. So it's definitely influenced my ear. So that's a question I've wondered, whether my ear has been influenced by hearing my mom play piano every night pretty much. I've wondered about that. Is it enhanced my is it part of the explanation for my love of sonic complexity?
Yeah.
Or also seeing all these large symphony orchestras like every week practically, was that also dense arrangements, which I tend to like. So when I like shoegaze or whatever, because I think those are the two poles. I like to think that I'm pretty good at like stripped down in your face, but the opposite pole of that is probably a little bit more where my heart is, or maybe where my I feel like my talent is.
Mm.
Maybe acquired talent is. But I mean, I can appreciate, hard and straight too, but I'm not sure it's my forte. But
Okay.
yeah, so I don't know. I haven't really, also in my band, there's a viola player, right? So there's nothing really against the instruments, but I don't, as far as like pure classical music, I mean, talk about institutional. I mean, that's like, I like to think that there's examples. I do know some people that have more of a DIY thing and concept with like small ensembles of classical music. So it's not impossible. And also trying to educate and bring that to like underprivileged children. I can't be too against that. But when it's a night of the at the opera, and it's like people in furs, or
Yeah.
people like in, I can't be. I'm sort of against really like rich people's culture. That's why I'm
Is it,
into you know
yeah. Is it the kind of the decadence of it all that kind of sours you?
well, also I think there's a lot of good music out there, so I'm perfectly happy personally
Mhm.
jettisoning. Talk about it's almost my little bit of cancel culture, where I'm like comfortable just canceling this stuff that's made for millionaires by
Yeah.
millionaires, that's old, and that was and developed in like the royal, because it reeks of like royalty,
Mm.
right? And the royal patrons of like the Enlightenment or something. It's hard for me to like, for the same reason I'm not inspired to listen to Kanye. It's like it's just uh, the music that's handed down top down from our rulers. I just not,
Yeah,
you know,
trickle down music.
yeah, I just, yeah, I'm kind of uninspired. But like I said, there's like these weird ironies in my own stuff where you can tell I do come from that maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Well, also the issue now is, all the kind of uh, working class or kind of underprivileged musicians that are now going to be sort of maxed out of, I think, a lot of cultural centers, unfortunately, as we were talking about earlier. So that's that's the harsh reality, I think, too. Thanks very much for
Yeah.
your time, man. I've really appreciated talking with you, and sorry for taking up so much of your time. I really appreciate
Oh,
this talk, and I just wonder, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up, or
um, no, I mean, I think I really friggin' said everything
perfect?
that was on my mind. Yeah, and thanks for supporting
Oh,
live
totally.
music or all this stuff.
No, thank you,
So
and thank
anyway,
you very much for
thanks
talking.
for the great conversation, Aaron. I'm going to send you that video as soon as I can find your. Uh, yeah, I'll find it, or I'll have Dan send
Okay.
you the video, just because
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good
Thanks very
day or
much. You too.
evening.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks. Bye. Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. If you liked it, please subscribe and stick around because we have plenty more like this coming soon.